I think I should call the meeting to order and we should go on. Okay. So,
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I just stepped away, but I'm here now.
oh, good.
Sheila.
So at this point, it's 7:04, and I'm going to open the meeting. And our vice chair and our chair, Megan Cope, is out ill tonight. And I see Shayla and then as the other commissioner, and then Emily and Matt as staff, and Carol Stewart as public. And all of our meetings, Carol, are open to the public, so you're always welcome. So we're going to start, but without a quorum. We're not going to try to approve the minutes. But Shayla, did you have?
Here, last time,
So
but they were
did have
helpful
comments,
to read, but I didn't have any comments.
and I did have comments, and I gave them to Emily, and she made everything make sense. So then public comment for items not on the agenda, and I gather, Carol, that you're not here for public comment per se, just to listen.
I'm just a lurker.
Okay. Okay. And is there any other public comment? Okay, so capital budget, and welcome, Jeff. We are supposed to do the capital budget for the next 20 minutes, but Shirley is not here. And actually, we're 5 minutes ahead.
That may be why. She's probably popping in from Zoom, so.
Okay. I didn't see whether she was over there or not. She usually is in the back of the select board. So Jeff, we only have two commissioners here right now, Shayla and me. So we'll do what we can.
Well, we'll roll with the punches.
What do you say?
Roll with the punches.
Roll with the punches, yeah. Do you have, how many response, if I may sort of talk about the coming agenda items while we wait for Shirley, do you have, how many responses did you get to the two surveys?
Just two, you and Jill.
Okay.
And we did send those on to Jeff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he's got those.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I'm saying, those are the questions about the one that we didn't go all the way over.
Yes, one was on the regulating plan, which is the one the new one we're going over, and the other was on the public realm and street map that we were in the middle of. Actually, we were most of the way through it, I think. I think we were pretty much through it. I think it was to resolve. The links, at least in the email, I think were backwards, but it was the two things, and that was fine. Do we want to skip over the capital budget for the moment and then go back to it when Shirley joins us? Or are you expecting it to be exactly on at 10 past?
I wouldn't want to get rolling too much
Okay.
on the code. I would just mention to you and Shayla and Chase, and I think we and I have talked about it, but you know where we're at on the staff side. Staff is grinding away on all of the things that have to be done to the existing zoning bylaw to fit the FBC in. So, you know, places where we have to say, well, this is the chapter about signs, but if you want to know about signs for tap corners, you need to go to this other document. Some other things like that. And, you know, generally the goal is that the form-based code won't change anything outside of the code area. And even within the code area, some recent work done by the commission, like the work on the cannabis retail, which has some boundaries that live inside the form-based code area, won't change. So There are some other things that we just did, like parking, that do change because the form-based code takes them on. And we're going to talk about that next time. But we're working on that. As of today, Melinda produced a updated official map that pulls the streets from the regulating plan into the official map, and we would expect to bring that through the hearing process at the same time as the form-based code, because it really provides the legal mechanism by which the town could get the street rights of way and the public green spaces that are anticipated in the coded area. So those things are all in motion. It'll be tight, but our goal is probably to have everything in some form or another uploaded for the January 4th meeting. And I've outlined a very optimistic schedule at the bottom of the agenda that went out today that would have us warning public hearings starting on February 1st. And that's sort of saying there's enough of a draft here that all of the chapters are there and have been gone through at least once. And we could take it into that hearing process. Things could still change during the hearing process. In fact, I expect they would. And coming out of hearing would be ultimately a transmittal to select board for their consideration and ultimate adoption. So I've got all the steps laid out there, the schedule. We're trying our best to not have it slide because there's other things that are going to be coming to the planning commission soon enough. And it's a pretty terrific document as it sits right now. But we just keep putting one foot in front of the other and we'll get there.
Did we put Shirley at 7:10?
I haven't gotten an email from her or anything like she's looking for a Zoom link.
So in a general category, if we don't want to get into the weeds at all, I would say, especially to you, Shayla and Jeff, that I'm at the saturation point on a lot of this, and I think some other planning commissioners reached a saturation point earlier. And so when I go through the surveys, I sometimes am saying I'm overwhelmed or I feel I know enough to comment.
Mm-hmm.
I do so much appreciate how much detail we have gone through as a planning commission. And the time you've spent, Jeff, and you, Emily, and Matt, that I feel like you have educated us enough that if things get into hearings and there's questions come up, we at least have a stab at being able to say why something's the way it is. And I'm reaching a level of trust that if the experts say this is a good idea, it probably is, and I don't, every planning commissioner can't understand every detail.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we go through the things today, that's where I am on several of them.
Mm-hmm.
The
I
other
definitely
thing,
echo that. I mean, I had, I think, the most to say. I mean, I think it was ordered well because the first two were where I felt the most able to really dig in.
one overall one in the public realm area for me is, where does municipal stormwater go? It's a service to the area, much like the street trees. It's a part of the environment that we are trying to make the same across different owners and different businesses and so forth. And so is there something about it in there in a different chapter, Jeff?
Not really. Where it goes is it goes to the town. And it was a strong recommendation in the vision plan, but it's
Yeah.
not really a code item. And it's it's really important. I think staff knows that. It's also really something that's going to have to be dealt with as it comes because, you know, you don't have the capacity to do it all now. You've got to kind of grow into it, like a number of things.
So that means it's important for us to pick up that ball and run with it. Is there a place that we should at least give it lip service? So like in the introduction to the public realm, say that this an acknowledgement that the vision said, just, you know, restating the vision said that there would be municipal stormwater treatment so that it was shared across properties. And at least acknowledge that so that someone reading the regulating plan or reading the bylaw would know that.
Like the future issues memo has been referred.
Yeah, I'd be interested. I would expect Matt and Taylor to say, it really doesn't belong in the code itself because it belongs in the vision plan, which should not go away. There's nothing in the code about what they have to do with their stormwater, and there's certainly nothing that makes it more difficult for them to do the right thing.
Yeah, I think, you know, where we'll be right now is the existing zoning bylaw says you've got to treat your stormwater to the satisfaction of the state permitting authorities. What's going to happen a little bit, I think, is the form that this code pulls for is going to encourage people to really integrate stormwater treatment into their sites, because it's going to be a really expensive use of land to do a pond, an on-site pond. In fact, I think it's going to be really difficult to do that. So, you know, vaults with subsurface disposal or things like that, but even that's going to have its limits. And things are you know, far more achievable if you start consolidating stormwater service and you know, providing it as a utility.
And there's an opportunity like in the South Burlington Market Street stormwater treatment park, if you will, complete with artwork and everything. There's an
And
opportunity
benches.
yeah, benches and artwork and good plantings.
And that we're really getting into the public realm standards, slipping in there. But this relates to something that Shayla said in our walk up about wanting to have, well, it ties in stormwater and the spaces that are not just, I think I'm trying to quote Shayla saying, not just a bunch of grass. And that is the areas that are identified in the regulating plan as park/natural area. Those are, I would say, kind of a basketball analogy, a layup for helping to handle the stormwater because they're very much, I'm sure, you know, Burrow Hill is an exception because it's a hill, but they really tend to be right next to wetlands. So they're in the natural flow of the water, and it's kind of a logical and Mother Nature way of handling the runoff before
The
it gets.
perimeter, certainly for the perimeter properties.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, and one thing we may think about, we've got an outstanding issue we've been talking about at a staff level, which is how we might handle minor wetland incursions and wetland buffer incursions in this district, how we might do that differently than we do elsewhere. And, you know, another layup, as Jeff would say, is to allow some stormwater treatment work to happen in those wetland buffers where it's going to be a naturalized planting anyway. You know, it's an opportunity to build something like that pond in South Burlington, and also achieve your treatment in a place where you don't want a building or a parking lot or, you know, a street, something like that.
And that doesn't have, does that work environmentally in terms of giving it enough space to filter or do whatever it needs to do?
Well, yeah, I mean, those ponds, regardless of where they are going to flow into some natural water system eventually. So the design is based on how big of a storm can pond in the pond and then be slowed down and eventually released either through groundwater or surface flow. So whether it releases through surface flow through a stream that's 1,000 feet long or just a spillway that's 10 feet long, it's not really changing the treatment that's happening.
Jeff, go ahead. We're so small, you should just go ahead and talk.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And this is a little bit, this is something I have a little bit of knowledge. It's a dangerous thing on, but working with some landscape architects, they can do things to within that area before it gets to the wetlands to play in subtle ways with the topography and do things so that the water moving from where it comes in to where it gets to the wetland isn't so much a straight path, even if it's a sheet flow. They can make it take a lot longer to get there and do things like the term I love is riffle and spill. So that they're like series of terraces and the water moves and has a chance to, besides going through plants that like that environment and help filter it, it also has a chance to settle a little bit and spill over. So they're, you know, none of that's in the code, but there are all those kind of techniques that, you know, a smart designer, stormwater person can take advantage of working with the biology.
The other thing is, do we say explicitly that all utilities are underground, or is that assumed?
That's not in this code, but in the UDR existing. Is it?
It's in the overall bylaw.
Okay,
It definitely would still apply here.
okay. Maybe we shouldn't wait for Shirley more.
Yeah, I'd say just let's roll into the code and we can
Okay.
shift gears. We're small enough group if we need to.
So for your benefit, Carol, the first thing we're going through is called the regulating plan for the Taft Corners development area, where it's what types of streets and so forth. And so with apologies for the fact that we've already been talking about this for a couple months,
Yeah,
we're going to launch into some of the weeds on that.
just pretend I'm not here. You don't have to explain it.
Okay.
But thanks anyway.
So I don't know. I can give the very briefest introduction to the regulating plan and then Jeff, I think, roll right into it. So the regulating plan is the map of existing and future streets in the form-based code area and what is allowed to be built for by how the street is designated. So this is a little different from a zoning map that would have sort of big blotches of different color and say this kind of thing goes here and that kind of thing goes there, in that it's keyed to the frontage of the street rather than the piece of land. So that's what a regulating plan is at its very most basic. And then on the regulating plan, there will generally be a build to line, which is mostly having buildings come up to the street, and a parking setback line, which pushes parking back away from the street. And then there's a text chapter that goes with the map that says what I just said, but better, and a few other things about how you use the regulating plan when you're trying to determine what sort of development is allowed in a particular location within Taft Corners. And I'll stop right there.
You're on mute.
It's in the contract that I have to do that. All
I
right.
know, I put it there.
Welcome to Taylor too.
Yes, the three easy pieces that Matt talked about a little. This is what you, well, just everyone has seen this once before, so I'm kind of helping us get back. And then we learned if you're the government doing this, there's a fourth piece, which is the public realm standards. Those places. Now we're doing the regulating plan. It's like a super 21st century zoning map. The Taft Corners regulating plan is based on the vision plan, which is an illustration of things that could be. And there's our regulating plan really tied to that public effort. Now, about the border, the town, the school, and a bit of the neighborhood that just went out of my head there, we have taken out of the Taft Corners form-based code because there's just no idea about changing any of that. It's going to be adjacent to and take advantage of, but it's not really part of the form-based code. Doesn't make sense to form-based code that area. Also, the area down at the bottom, which I don't know the official name, I've been calling it the auto-centric and big box area. In the future, for who knows how long, there's going to be a need for that kind of stuff. And it's already down there. The Home Depot and the Walmart apparently are doing well. So here's the regulating plan as it stands today. And by the way, I've set this up mainly, I'm not really talking about the Bill 2 line or the RBLs, but what we're looking at. In terms of public open space, I think this is something I've heard a lot of conversation about since actually just before we started. So there's no excuse for not getting it right. I applied a bunch of 650-foot radius circles. It's like if you were in the middle of this, in one of these greens, how far away you could get in 2.5 minutes, or how long it would take you if you lived in that radius to get there, showing what we've got and how I think we've got the place really well covered. So the idea is if you live in the future here, you're going to be able to walk to one of these civic greens. Now, this is not dealing with the park's natural areas. Those are in addition to this. But within about a 2.5 minute walk at the most, with some exceptions, you're going to be able to get to one of those open spaces that's a little park with street trees around it, where you can do whatever, throw the frisbee, eat lunch. And one got added since the first regulating plan. We added this one down here because there's a kind of a little bit of a desert down there south of Maple Tree Place. Right now it's a desert of asphalt with parking lots, but we added a green down there and looking to fill that hole. Basically, I found a block down there in the regulating plan that was just an easy thing to do. There's excessively long and skinny, so by nipping the nose of that block off, this is Juniper Lane. Right now, just above that Merch Row, which is not a real name yet, that's where you see the southernmost buildings that make Maple Tree Place up. So there's a little crank to the buildings. So right here, we really just cut the nose off, pull that nose of the block back. This is about 164 feet from this building to this building. And then from the curb to the building face, that's 109 feet, 200 and some 4 feet sidewalk to sidewalk in this direction. So it's what I would call a really perfect little square civic green pocket park.
I was surprised, if you look in the northeast quadrant, Finney Crossing has none of these spaces, and the Peter Judge property, we didn't even put any roads through Peter Judge's property for the long range planning. I was wondering why that was.
I think that's a combination of it's the words I hate, done deal. So much of Finney Crossing is a done deal. Also, this it's guilty of a little bit of underreporting because there's some green spaces, but they're kind of, with the exception of this one that's right here, which is like a triangular halfway close to this street.
It is private, though. That is for the people who live there.
Yeah. So, that's kind of just the way it is.
In other words, I have a hard time considering that one a public green place you can walk to, because if someone walked there and started letting their dog play frisbee with them, they would be kicked out immediately.
Really?
Yeah, do they have a pool there or just a little playground?
I believe they also have a pool.
Yeah.
It would be possible to add the green that's going in by the hotel and the restaurant as desirable as a public green, because that's in the commercial part of Finney, whereas some of the other ones, like in the whole yellow loop of Zephyr, there's a lot of green spaces there, but they're, essentially the backyard to the townhomes.
Yes.
Or the apartment buildings.
It's kind of a different animal than it shows in this. But Emily, you'll have to enlighten me after the meeting of what's missing down here.
So on the Peter Judge property, which is the property right on the northeast corner of Taft Corner, it's right there. That's old one-story development. And we have a road going across the northern end of there, a new road connecting right through there, yeah.
Yeah, that connection is definitely new. And
there's some green, right around there's some green, especially under the power lines. And there's even a small gazebo there on somebody's property. But I was really surprised we didn't say in the long term, we want a public park there because we lack green space in that area. And it's not built, except for some of it would be parking lot. And if that shopping center were ever redone, wouldn't we want it redone according to this code? And if so, why don't we show grids through there?
yeah, I think and it's a tough nut to crack because of the power lines make it a little bit tougher, but what we've put here is we're really making this the entry to a street right now, and this is a designated alley looping around and actually also coming out here. The stormwater pond for the hotel makes that a lot more difficult. We're really setting them up because we are kind of forcing this, which is a kind of a street, but we're making it an absolute street. So the connection from right here through that corner is almost given. I didn't quite feel like we had the strength to go ahead and lay that down there.
What do you mean almost given?
Well, they've got to build a street here and they've really got to turn this corner. So that right of way is reserved back to about 60 feet, and then they've already got an alley. So when they're redeveloping, that connection is going to be a logical one for them to make. And they're kind of going to be forced to, it's also logical because the code requires all buildings to have entry, to have front to front on a street. So if they don't build that as a new street, then they don't get to have building frontage on it, and their properties they can only have front on these streets. So we've set things up to make them want to do that, but you're absolutely right. And I noticed that as in the figure grounds and the early maps, kind of a big blob.
If you were just to draw a straight line from Day Lane to the north, down to that nub right where your pointer is right now, it would be yes, from the left hand of those two roads up there, from Day Lane there, straight north-south, you would come to that nub. You would go through an existing 40-year-old one-story building. But if we're talking about things that are going to happen 40 years out. And so I just didn't understand why there wasn't a grid street through there in that direction and then one in the other direction to match everything else we proposed.
This is my chin scratching, which is body language saying, well, you've got a good point.
And I would include in the north end of that a small pocket park at a minimum.
Yes, I'm gonna try to get this on the screen.
I think this is a bit of calculus, Chapin, that we
It's
you know, we made
calculus.
we made his staff and consultant in terms of our discussions with the judges, in terms of seeing that stormwater infrastructure there behind the hotel and its newness, and as we call out in that vision plan, that being one of the keys to unlock this area is probably rethinking how we how we treat stormwater, in less on an individual basis, more on a collective basis within Taft Corners.
And I would, yeah, I understand there's infrastructure, but there's also infrastructure on Zephyr Road, and we're saying that we're putting on the plan that it's eventually gonna have a cycle track. And
Yep.
there's infrastructure in the northwest quadrant, and we're specifying things through there. So I didn't
Yep.
understand why this one property right in the center, we've avoided saying, here's what we would like in the long term if it changes hands or gets redeveloped.
Yeah, that stormwater pond is like weirdly hard to move because
Right.
I'd like
they've
to
now-
move,
Yeah.
I'd like to put that street you're talking about through.
And there's now Tesla chargers right at the end of that street too. But my point wasn't to so much on the east-west connection as the north-south is the starting one, the more obvious to me.
Yes,
And that doesn't touch the ponds.
And that would just be, right. Oh, all the way up there. I was even just thinking you could connect it to 2,
these two,
just south, yeah.
little Ed. Yeah, that's a little bit easier. You're only stepping on a pencil thin piece of it.
Okay, so my input is we need a park in there somewhere. And we should have a grid streets on the long range plan, not on the Peter Judge plan, but on the long range plan. And to me, when you've been drawing your line, Jeff, you've been going from the what I think is Madison Street. And I think we want to go from Day Lane, that one, the left one. Yeah.
This one.
From that one, continue straight down to where that nub is. Yeah, right there.
I mean, the
To me, I
easiest way to, you know, just sneak in a park here would be, you know, under the power lines, given that there isn't really any other use for that area besides parking in terms of what Velco will let us do. You know, that park would certainly be limited in terms of what it could have for trees. But, you know, would that be acceptable to the PC, or do we want to find a different location?
What I'm wanting is green space in the northeast quadrant, which until you get up to the top parcel, there's none.
Yeah, understood.
Well, it's, yeah, though it's,
Public
I'm
green
in,
space.
I'm in favor of what you're talking about. That most of Finney Crossing is a tough nut to crack because it's already done. You know, the commitments and the legal ownerships are there. But
I understand that. I don't understand the Peter Judge property not having what we think we would like.
yeah, I'm wondering if we couldn't at least get this connection. The north-south, because of, see, when you put a street along that, part of the advantage of a street is it's valuable, buildable property on both ends. And if you've got a stormwater pond here,
It should be further to the west, Jeff. It shouldn't be along the pond. It should be due north-south from Day Lane down to that point. And so there would be room to build on the right side. on the
but
east
this
side.
comes, but if you pull Day Lane down and then over,
No, you have to go right through the buildings that are there.
yeah, I'm going right through them, but you still have a lot of it going along this. We'll develop some scenarios and send them out because I'm incredibly friendly to that. We just got frustrated with it looked like we could not do it earlier.
Okay,
I want to try it and then sort of run it through the reality test of staff and Taylor, not Judge. We haven't run any of this through him.
no, and I would expect he wouldn't want anything there, and we would say, nothing has to go there, but when you sell it.
And he'd want 5 stories.
Right.
Yeah, it would be an advantage.
Well, in terms of greens in this area, the gazebo at Hamlet backs up to the community gardens in,
Yes. At
Finney.
Finney Crossing, yes.
yeah, if you cursor to the left, right
Right
there.
there.
That could be a second potential spot, marking that as some sort of urban
Yeah.
park.
But I can tell you right now, the people, even though that's shared private land for the hamlet, the people who live there don't like you walking between their houses to get to where that gazebo is.
Mhm.
You know, just as an idea, the what has essentially evolved into the semi-public green at Finney down along the side of the hotel. As an aspiration that might just become publicly owned at some point, it could be mapped. It's obviously way out in the future, and I'm not sure that the town would want it if it was offered today. But it is a green that's for anybody, but it's under private ownership right now.
They actually had a public space there that was fairly large earlier on, and they
Oh, yeah.
kept chipping away into it.
Yeah, read the
Well-
staff report for building H. I go into detail.
Okay.
Okay, I have big notes on Northeast Green, Chapin.
Thanks.
Could we move on? I have two more quick things to show that I think will help illuminate the discussion later. That one is a brief discussion about why we put the urban general where we did and the urban general 2 where it is also. The one big difference, urban general is taller, urban general 2 is 1 story lower, and it also does not give retail as an option. So any of the orange you see here, someone, if they wanted to try and put a store in it, they could. We wouldn't encourage them to, because the United States has way too much retail already. But the logic was, now these are, pardon my scribble, this is lines drawn with a thumb ball, so it's a little ugly. But these are the streets that are kind of busier, carry more traffic. They include all the, wait, one more click, the framework streets. And these are, with an exception, this street also has the bike lane, the cycle track on it, as does Zephyr. But these are kind of the bigger, busier streets. Did not want to take away the retail option from that and force those to be residential or office only. So there's some logic to having those a little bit able to respond more to the market where they have a higher level of traffic or busyness. And then in here and around Trader Lane Green, have that be a residential, well, it could be office, but I think the reality is going to be, 99% accuracy, it'll be a residential buildings there. Most of them will be. So that's part of the logic why what is orange versus I'll call it melon.
And classrooms could be in either of those, correct?
Actually, we probably need to be really specific about that. Classrooms definitely are in the orange. I think right now it's not, classrooms would not be in the melon color,
Classrooms
except
like schools.
if it's a school, if
When
it's a
Vermont Tech
school,
expands.
it can be anywhere.
Yeah, don't worry about schools. We got schools. We're good.
Oh,
Yeah,
Vermont,
they can go where they want.
for some reason, Chapin, I apologize. I immediately thought of some kind of continuing education or for-profit night school or something. Never mind. Yeah, schools you can't not allow. So schools can go anywhere. And Virginia Tech up here, absolutely. Taylor and I had Taylor educated me on that, and then I blew it. We talked.
That's okay.
All right.
That's okay.
So that's kind of, that's that logic. And then I think I have a final slide just showing, and then also the presence of the kind of industrial area over between Taft Corners and the airport made sense for the orange and not the melon color. And then the disposition of streets here. Now the colors are completely different. But, and we did talk about those earlier, so I don't want to take up any more time with that.
I have one general comment about all the street specification things. And that is, I still want more space between the front of the building and the sidewalk. Whether it's for a shop front to be able to have tables on the outside without having people then have to walk around them on the sidewalk, or whether it's residential, just to have a little bit of a green area where somebody's dog can poop, or that they then are gonna pick up hopefully, or plant a garden or a flower bed. I don't like the feeling of being a pedestrian between a curb and a tall building. And pretty much I put it in the comments, there's only one of these that I felt wasn't an issue. This one I felt it wasn't an issue. Because there's such a wide tree green that I felt like it'd have this feeling of space out there. But on all the others, it feels to me like the front yard, quote unquote, isn't a yard. It's just it's 7 feet, I think. Is that right? Yeah, it's 7 feet, and it doesn't feel like enough to me. And I realize this is a cultural thing probably. And I feel like I wanted to ask, were some of the street cross sections made a little wider based on input from the planning commission? Okay.
Yes, that is how we got here.
I really appreciate that, because it does feel to me like most of the space is good. It's just that last 7 feet to the front of the building feels to me like still too close on most of them. And especially on ones like here where it's paved, because you might have shops on the first floor. It feels like if somebody wanted to set up some tables out in front of their shop, they're going to be into the sidewalk very quickly.
Actually, they can't be in the sidewalk. They have 5,
What I meant to say is their dooryard.
right?
Their dooryard's only 5 feet, and so you can't really do anything out there.
Oh, that's actually a pretty typical area for sidewalk cafes. That's a generous area for I think it's a case, it's just a different environment. I know if you go back to Victor Dover's video, the YouTube presentation about streets, if you look at those, this is bigger than all of those, I believe. Although I've looked at it.
If you wanted to put a table with an umbrella on it, okay. To me, I'm just saying, to me, my feedback.
Yeah. But we did, I think we started off with this one on 2.
So Jeff, first off, this is our store, our shop front section, correct?
Yes, not only shop front, there are some places where
Okay.
there are a few streets that have this residential section.
You know, in a shop front scenario, Chapin, you know, we're talking about a built form that's going to require, you know, those larger shop front windows. It's likely that we wouldn't be in a situation where we would have umbrellas at tables. We would probably have, as shown here, an awning or some sort of covering over that 5 foot dooryard space instead of.
You could do a table, 1 table deep. You can't do 2 tables deep.
No. You know, it's, you know, I certainly understand your viewpoint. I'd like to hear that strongly from other PC members if we're going to make a change. You know, if that's the case, you know, we've got a little bit of wiggle room there. You can't see my cursor. I'm not sure where I'm trying to show you though. But you know, there in the tree lawns, you know, going smaller potentially too. You know,
I like the tree lawns as big as they are. All the changes you made so far are great. I'm just asking for one more change, not a trade-off.
I'll give you a very tactical answer. You know, if we're trying to expediently pass this bylaw, and Jeff's got to change the whole regulating plan to account for a couple more feet on each side, we're not gonna meet the deadlines we've set. I mean, that's just reality. You know, we can add another foot or two if you think you need to, but it's going to slow us down.
But what I would say about that is I don't want to slow things down, because I feel like the overall goal of getting this in place trumps the other goals. You know, we've got a lot of good. We don't want to sacrifice the good for the perfect. but we also are saying we want to go and we will be revising. And so to me,
Yep.
this is a list of issues to resolve. After adopting this, we have, before anything is actually built, we can still be working on it, but we have to at least have it in place. So I'm supportive of moving forward.
And I appreciate that pragmatism, Chapin, and if that's something that's very desirable for the PC to add a couple more feet, let's have that conversation in the future. I'm fine doing that.
Thanks.
I normally agree with absolutely everything Chapin says, but I would need, I think I need to maybe just like go stand in a couple of street spaces and try to feel that, because Chapin, my one concern is that then like side to side, like it just starts to feel very, like you still want to be able to feel like you're on a cohesive street, and I don't want the buildings to be so far apart that there's some streets like that in like Washington, DC, or areas where like the street is so wide and so big, and it feels less like you're in a place where you can easily walk back and forth and around. I don't know that 1 or 2 feet would change that. And I do like the idea of tables.
Yeah,
on
hooks,
right by
having,
the sidewalk. So I am in favor of that, but yeah.
Jeff,
And I
Our
mean, it
DC
sounds like
resident wants to talk.
that's what, yeah. Well, yeah. And second, Chapin, what you're talking about sounds like you really like the village.
no, I
Yeah.
don't.
And the point is, that's a hugely different environment. And I would say, with my tongue in my cheek, we don't want to compete with that.
No, I totally agree. And I also realize it's a cultural issue of where I grew up and where I've lived. And how I react to what's happening in Winooski and Essex Junction. Okay, what more do you want to cover here, Jeff?
Well, in the chapter itself, did people have particular issues they wanted to bring up? Issues, problems?
All right, I was on mute. I had a question, which was on page 71. Just wanted to know why this bicycle racks was in pink.
No, in the public realm standards. Which I-
Oh, sorry, am I not in the right place?
That's okay.
No, but if it's in pink, it's because I can answer that. It's a recent change, and it should be, unless I screwed up, which I do. If you look at the one version back, that language was different or wasn't there.
Thank you.
So
Sorry,
that's an
my
innovation.
wrong tab. I'll go to my other tab with my other comments.
Yeah, we're in
The
section
regulating plan, yeah, sorry.
section 2, excuse me.
I've only raised my hand because Jeff, on page 11, I just want to make sure we're consistent. If you go up a little bit, very top there under 2E, that 100 feet, let's make sure we're consistent with what's in section 5. I'm not sure if we said 150 there.
Okay.
Let's just, I just want to make sure we're consistent there.
Yeah.
This is one of those areas that I'm putting entire trust in you professionals.
Well, and the 100 feet, the point is not to have, people coming out, cars too close together, coming out into a new direction. The engineers
Yeah.
like to talk about points of conflict. So this
I totally get it.
this is largely a traffic engineer's question. And
I understand why it's, I just don't have any opinion about what it should be, the amount it should be, because I trust you guys.
we will
I
double
did
check.
not have comments on this one. I'm sorry, I was in my other tab.
That's good, Shayla.
Jeff, did I say anything in the comments that you wanted to bring up on this one? When I filled out the survey, and apparently Jill did too.
I haven't seen that yet. Matt or Emily have that?
This was in the survey, Jason.
Yeah, I did answer.
Right.
I didn't break down my answers.
It could, one thing while they're pulling that out, I want to talk about on page 11, 3C, if constructed within X feet from the center line location, there's a piece in here allowing someone who say, and here you've got large landowners, so they may own tracts of land that include several blocks. This is saying, well, you have to, you must, and you will preserve the number of streets and blocks. You can, what I would call tweak, if you have some reason or you find something out that makes you want to squeeze a street over 50 or 75 feet in one direction or the other, but preserve everything, just kind of like you're in a computer, a Photoshop program, slide something over, you can do that with the zoning administrator's approval and you don't screw anybody else up. My point is, as an urban designer and a form-based code writer, if I showed you two regulating plans that had, I would say even a 75-foot difference on one of these streets, unless I overlaid them and toggled back and forth, no one would recognize it. It's sort of like within the, it's just an adjustment. And putting in that 50 or 75 feet is kind of acknowledging there may be things that we don't know, and if it makes a project work, or there's some piece of infrastructure or something about the topo, we should give them that wiggle room, probably best known as wiggle room.
I do have comments which Emily found, but I think I also want us to move along. And so I wonder, can I just ask that
Yes.
they maybe be addressed separately? Because with just this small group, everybody doesn't get the benefit of your response if we just say it now. Is that okay?
Works with me.
So then should we move on to the public realm? Which we actually had mostly done before.
Yes, I was actually thinking we had done it, but I can get to it.
Section 5. And I did save my responses on this one, so I can look at that.
Yeah, the idea was to give folks public realm as a follow-up survey, right?
Yeah,
And regulating plan was a lead-in survey to tonight.
good. And I put the question about stormwater, which we dealt with already.
And I can point out a couple of, I'll call them chapins. These are things where on the street trees, Chapin sent a lot of information, and I fired back an email saying, basically, great, somebody else who's as committed to street trees as I am, and we're really on the same page. But I have to say, Chapin, you did tweak a couple of changes that they're just improvements, and I'm not finished with the trees, but Acer rubrum is here.
Yeah, we both had red maple.
Yes, also number 2 in this, which is adding a line, there's an issue about species diversity. And it's a kind of a simple and pretty well accepted rule.
I totally agree with it.
Yeah, it's you don't just as the things are built, you don't want, if you see that you're starting to have too many of one species, and this says too many is 21%. So if you've used up all of your red maple allocation, then you go to another tree, so that you don't end up with a bunch of Dutch elms, covering the whole place, which nobody's that crazy anymore. But I was surprised.
Use green ash.
I was surprised, yeah, the green ash was that prevalent. I mean, it's a great tree, but
It was more than 50% of our street trees.
it's not even on the list. So a couple of Chapins.
The problem was the lack of diversity. So we'll continue to work on the details of that list, but that certainly shouldn't hold anything up. And we're all agreed that no invasives, but and emphasize natives. And 2007 review of our street trees that we hired a consultant and everything. They recommended we have a tree board to advise on these things. And I could see from the things they recommended doing about pruning trees that we need an arborist. And so I think that's a branch off of this is for us to consider those things.
And a number of those recommendations had already are in this document, but certainly just some of them. And then there are a couple of things here that trying to make it more clear that this list is just for the street trees and all, other trees for else. That's a concern, responding to a concern of Megan's.
So one of my issues was on the new map. This at the end of this section, that has street types. There's 3 green colors. And they don't differentiate on the printout well enough for me.
Oh, yeah, our printout came out horribly.
And the other thing is on it, it's hard to pick out where our bicycle routes are. And
This is only the streets. Pardon me for saying that streets and cars are the same thing, because they're not, but okay, we'll redo that. But I do want to stress the streets map is really intended to be part of just the town's implementing thing. It's not really a code issue, it's a spring, but so that up, but I'll also make sure that the colors are a little
raised the question for me, like on something like, we say there's going to be a cycle track on Zephyr Road, but that's not going to be for decades, in my opinion. And so do we just say that bicycles can take the lane on Zephyr Road, or do we say they can take the lane anywhere? And on the chart you've got up right now, just below cycle track is Sharrows. And I noticed that we have Sharrows where on everything except an alley if it's not a cycle track. So it looks like you're allowing for bike lanes that way. And I wondered if that
Sharrows
just on that chart, just above the horizontal dark line, just below cycle track, in the chart on the lower right.
In the table.
In the table. Yeah.
In the table below cycle track, above pedestrian facilities.
Yeah, there you go. So if you look at cycle track and Sharrows rows, which are 2/3 of the way down right there, those 2 rows, there's a yes in every column except the last one on alleys, in one or the other. And it looked to me like you're allowing for bicycles to be able to use all the streets. And when they're not on a cycle track, they would have some kind of Sharrows painted in the road where they would go, I assume.
Well, it would, yes, but or with that, bicycles by law can take up any lane except freeways. Here.
So what wasn't clear to me was there going to be a bike lane within the travel area, or could bikes just take the lane? And if so, if they can just take the lane, why do we have Sharrows? And so can you explain a little bit about that?
Well, I see that as kind of the same thing. A Sharrow is a painted, trying to give some warning to the motorists that they should work with the bikes.
Chapin, I'm not sure I totally follow what your question is, but
Yeah.
is part of your question answered by the bike lane or the bike lane row there in terms of no across the board? I mean, really what Rick Chelman, our consultant, has.
Here's an issue. Let me say an example. Let's take Zephyr Road. It is not going to be rebuilt with a cycle track. Where can bicycles go on Zephyr Road?
They
Yeah, I
can
don't-
take the road. I think, I wanna address this in two ways. So give me a second as I think this through. First off, I think we need to be clear about when an existing road needs to be upgraded to meet the standard. So Jeff and I will go back and talk about that because if the interest is, you know, at resurfacing requiring to do that or some other trigger point, we can be specific in the code about that. Or at least be specific potentially in the public works standards, which, you know, will eventually be amended. In terms of before Zephyr Road is reconstructed to include a cycle track, where can the bikes go? I mean, that would just be according to law. You know, and you know, as Jeff pointed out, you know, by law, you know, bikes can take the whole lane if they want. Now is that already been accepted as a public road or is that still privately held?
Zephyr is public.
Yeah, so I mean, in the interim period, if you know, Williston wants to put sharrows, they certainly can as an interim measure before a cycle track is constructed. But we're certainly not explicit about that in the code, Chapin.
Okay, there's two reasons I asked the question. One is that we have a sketch map somewhere that shows sort of here's where you can bike around this area, and it includes Zephyr Road as a primary place to bike. The second is we've said we want this to be very pedestrian and bicycle friendly area. There are speed bumps on Zephyr Road already because people speed on it and it's not being used by cars as a bicycle track by any means. So there's a conflict we're setting up, and with the way the curbing is on Zephyr Road, parking and curbing and sidewalks on both sides, it's going to be really hard to put a cycle track in without a major project. And it was just built. And so I look at it as Zephyr Road is going to be the way it is. And I want it to be really clear what our policy is. And it may be that it doesn't go in here, but the fact we put sharrows on some road types made me wonder whether that was unusual on that type, whether it's different on an ST 336/80 than it is an ST 36/74. You know, I wonder what that really means to a bicyclist.
I mean, Chapin, is it if it's a matter of in the code being specific about, you know, hey, look, some of you know X street type that already exists doesn't meet the standard because there isn't a cycle track, and therefore, as an interim measure, you know, sharrows shall be installed at X trigger point. I mean,
Yeah.
we can say that.
No, I don't. I mean, that is what I think we need to say, but it's helping me to hear this conversation. Thanks.
Okay.
If I could jump in, my understanding was, and in my mind, I'm thinking I saw this map, and that's part of the reason we have the cycle track street section going around Zephyr, but that was already designated as a cycle track or as a bike route, and that map is already out there. So it's kind of it's a live issue with reality and what town policy is. Kind of a second point, one difference to a bicyclist between the 86-foot street space and the 74-foot street space is all built and planted with trees. Let's give them a couple of years to grow. In that situation, people will naturally drive slower. You know, the visual friction will tamp them down. So bicyclists will be more comfortable because of that slower speed.
Actually, I have a suggestion, which is either drop that row that says sharrows or include an example of a sharrow on one of the diagrams that precedes. Because when I saw sharrows, I didn't know whether it meant take the lane or there's going to be a bike lane painted onto the existing.
Oh, no, a sharrow is, and we don't have it as a defined term, but it's commonly understood as it's a take the lane. This is a shared.
Okay.
I think it might even be shared right of way, but that may be too cute. But
I
it
think
just
that is
pure-
actually what it is. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
Perfect, then we're fine.
yeah, and I don't know, I'd wonder if Zephyr, this is talking out of my expertise, but I wonder if Zephyr wouldn't be more amenable to finding the space to put a bike, one of those not the best way to do it, but put a painted bike lane over between the travel lane and the parking. I know you get doored, but I wouldn't want to ride in the street on a street that wide fast. I'd at least be over on the side.
Okay, and on the diagram just to the left of that one on page 76, my comment was just, let's show solar canopies and rooftop solar somewhere in the sketches. Because we show sometimes balconies and sometimes awnings, but we don't ever show solar.
I will speak to our sketch.
And I don't want to slow anything up.
We should be able, I'll see if we can get some of those on.
And you probably saw I emailed you pictures of solar canopies over parking lots.
Yes.
In Berlin and in 2 other states.
I was just looking at that hours ago. And I'm going to look for a place to drop one of those in with the caption, specifying it as a parking lot, surface parking incorporating.
Perfect.
Shayla, did you have questions on section 5? No? Okay.
No, I had that one that I asked at the wrong time. Good.
I am incredibly excited about this project for a number of reasons. One of them is how green these streets are going to be, because these trees, unless you plant them in marbles or, asphalt or something, these trees are going to really, they should thrive and, just take over and every year increase the real estate value, which is not what I care about as much as the beauty, but
Well, but it is also very Vermont. I mean, we talked about this before, but it does make it feel. Gives it a more Vermont, slightly more rural feel, which is nice.
especially on the maple streets, although sorry for the cliche.
Yeah,
Well, we know we have to plant sycamores on Sycamore Street and
right.
I agree.
all right. I have some other comments in when I filled out the survey, but I don't think we need to talk about them as a group. I've said all the main points that I would bring up in discussion.
So I guess my question is to staff and to the PC is, we don't have a quorum tonight. We have an aggressive timeline. Do we really have a choice other than bringing section 2 back up at our next meeting? Because we need it, I don't know, because we probably should have a quorum when we're discussing, the regulating plan. Are we planning on making that change to schedule and talking about section 2 during that meeting?
I would encourage folks meeting into January 4th, Taylor, if they haven't done the survey, to do it, and we can try to have a brief conversation on the 4th.
Okay.
My thought is, if I can get a head nod to get a hearing warning in the door, that leaves most of January 18th for just a more global, wrap-up conversation. Issue spotting, we can't change the hearing draft at that point, but we can start taking notes on what might start happening as we
Get our list together for the hearing.
You got it.
So I just want to say I'm really in favor of the aggressive plan because I would like this to be in place before our density incentive, in March when we growth management, thank you.
Yeah.
Before growth management in March. And it would give people who already have applications a chance to say, oh, I want to go by the new code or something like that. But I feel like we need to get the code in place. We had this discussion about new applications coming in of the old code and decided our best tactic rather than going to interim zoning was to just go as fast as we can to get this in place. And so I'm in favor of getting this in place and immediately addressing the friction points that we have on it. And then there's only one friction point that I'm still wanting to know how to get back and resolve, and that is where I significantly disagree with the vision plan. And it shows up in a couple of places on the regulating plan too, what we should do. And to me, it depends partly, we can't do it tonight because it depends partly on how the rest of the planning commission feels. But I'll say one of the two big examples is, to me, in the southwest quadrant, the Harvest Lane loop that goes down towards Walmart and Home Depot. Yeah, in the right, yep.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, you're doing a good job getting us there. So that loop, you have green for a natural park. It's interesting what it's doing. It's loading everything probably.
Mhm.
So there is a natural park in half of what's now a single loop. And there's roads and it's residential there in the other half of that loop. So where there's that sort of curvy road on the, yeah, that's the bottom of the loop. And then the top is now the curvy road that's
Marshall.
Marshall, thank you.
Oh, this.
Yes, right now, there's nothing between Marshall and that loop. It's all wild in that interior space. And it's away from anything residential right now. It's sloped to the west. It's relatively dry on the upland parts. And then the part that shows the park here is relatively wet. And so it'd be an ideal place for an outdoor amphitheater, an ideal place for a dog park. And I would just like to see outdoor facilities in that entire loop and stop the residential grid at Harvest Lane. So that's just a feeling to me about long-range land use. And if the rest of the planning commission doesn't feel the same, then I wouldn't say, because this is like if we had to add more space for buildings, I would put, you might do that. But right now we haven't developed any of the stuff to the north and east of that as residential. And so the idea of making residential streets in that area that now is a natural place that was ideal for some other natural uses bothers me. So where do we want to park something like that? Yes, Jeff.
I just suggest there's an issue of scale here, that it's often hard to understand how big these places are. I think that natural area is huge
It is.
and could easily, an amphitheater would take up about, a third of that small green right there.
Not what I'm talking about, but yeah, I'm talking about a place for outdoor concerts, events, balloon launch. I don't know what, but I'm looking for, right now it's the part of it that's dry enough to want to do that is in the northeast part of that loop, where it's right now blocked off for other things. The area that's in green there now is great for a park, and it is fairly large. I don't know. I'm hearing your input though, that you could put an amphitheater in there. It just isn't what I was imagining in terms of an outdoor space. And I think we need to park it, because if the rest of the planning commission doesn't feel the same way, then then I'm a lone voice.
Is that,
And I
who
think-
owns that right now?
Davis.
Yeah, this is all.
It's Jeff Davis.
It's all one
And he-
parcel right now.
What'd you say, Taylor?
I believe it's all one parcel right now, correct?
It's 3 parcels, but it's
Yeah.
all the same ownership.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it has been, groomed and manicured to be a flat, marketable lawn on their commercial website.
Another
But-
Aldi's.
The The turquoise lines on here are the property boundaries.
Which unfortunately, yeah, at one point they were real property boundaries. Now, most of them don't really exist. We do have a map. We did a map.
And he
So
would
I would-
object.
No, I would just say, I was hoping to have that conversation tonight. We can't have that conversation tonight. You know, I'll defer to staff, and if we want to talk about that, ideally within like a 5 to 10 minute time frame next meeting. Or if we defer that conversation to an amendment later, if it proves to be more of a longer conversation. You know, I'll
Well,
also
even
just
with-
throw out there to kind of prep that conversation that there could be some ability to compromise here too, in terms of retaining some of the grid pattern and releasing some of it back to park space.
Well, I think anywhere there's the grid pattern shown, if the town decides that they want to develop an amphitheater or a dog park, because it's a municipal use, it can supersede a lot of what's in this regulating plan.
It's a really good point.
And to your point, like the corner at 2 and 2A near the stormwater pond, wanting to develop that as some sort of transit center, it's
Yes.
you
Oh.
can waive 4413, and the select
Yes.
board has, I don't know where it's gonna go in the budget discussion, but Matt, isn't there like 60,000 in the next couple fiscal years for the community center study?
Community center study, yes. So, you know, the town's gonna be looking at all of that fairly soon.
Yeah.
You're reminding me that I did want to ask a question about the regulating plan. There's somewhere it says you can't build where it doesn't allow you to build.
But yeah. I mean, yeah, off the top of my head, I can't tell you exactly where it says that, but it kind of, it's a matter of
But-
course.
But what concern? Design building projects. Oh, it says, I know what it is, 2D, identifying any civic buildings. I'm expecting us to want more civic buildings that we're not identifying at this time. And does that mean we have to do a zoning amendment if we
No.
want to? designate? Okay, thank
So
you.
we outlined that. I don't remember off in what section, but I believe it's in 3. In there, we specifically said that essentially a civic user could apply to the DRB to receive that exemption as a civic structure. And
I remember that, yeah. Good. Okay, and I put in my comments too, that the southeast corner of Taft Corners that includes the stormwater pond for Maple Tree Place, that on the regulating plan, I wanted, yes, right there, I wanted to reserve that entire block for civic use. Right now, you could put quite a few buildings on both the west side of the stormwater pond area and the south side. A lot of the east is reserved there as a park and a transit center. But it feels to me like if we ever had a police outpost, it should go there. If I put some other examples in my comments. You want to zoom in a little farther, Jeff?
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder if these are things that make sense as part of the, the project journal memo, like
Yes.
when you do your community center study, these are places that we think would be good spots within the growth
Yes.
center to scope.
Yes.
Um,
So there is that men's warehouse already there just south of that pond, but there's nothing on the southeast corner of that whole block. And I would rather leave it that way. In fact, the town owns some of that.
I just make the point about scale. if you reserve all of that for civic green, then that's where you'd put all the municipal stuff for the island of Manhattan or New York City. I mean,
Museum,
things don't take up that much room.
I could see a playground, a museum, bike, all mode shift stuff like bike rentals, in addition to the transit center, in addition to a.
That's not gonna take up, you could fit all that here. I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, think about some measurements so that, so that we're somehow, when we're talking about these things, we don't make decisions thinking that something this big is this big, or what you see on the map that is actually the size of the island of Manhattan or, downtown Montreal is actually this.
If you superimposed just a fraction of Central Park on here, it would take up 3 or 4 of these blocks. We're, in terms of it, as this builds up around it, and part of it is I've gone through with Green Mountain Transit, trying to fit a transit center in Burlington, trying to fit one in Montpelier, and we're shoehorning things in, taking over streets, spending millions of dollars to fit things where they don't fit. And I think we have plenty of space there for a transit center, I agree, but I don't want to do that at the expense of not being able to have a playground, not being able to have a museum in the future, not being able to have a police or a library outpost. And I realize they don't need all of that space. The things I'm imagining today don't need all of that space, but I see that that space, once taken for other things, is no longer available at the central location.
Well, this space is already taken, isn't it?
Privately held, but yeah.
But isn't it needed? Is it or is it not needed for the stormwater, the retention?
It's not part of the functioning of the stormwater, but it's what is its status?
I mean, it is a facility that is certainly required by their state stormwater permit in terms of the area where the stormwater is treated.
Yes, what I don't know is, I don't know how much of the green area around it is required as opposed to just mow it. So it shows as green.
I don't think much of it is, because the outfall is all underground.
Yeah.
So my main question here would be, we have 2 different colors of green here. We have our civic green, our lighter green. We have the darker green, which we're going to define a little bit better, but essentially means park, and it is an area that has no specific specs related to it. Do we want to link the area where the transit center is located that the municipality owns already to this privately held green space to make it one? I think that's certainly a hard sell with private stormwater infrastructure there, but just trying to start a conversation, like how should these 2 spaces, as we know that we're going to have, how should they interact?
Yeah, I changed that. I took it out of the civic green because it's really not a civic green unless you jump the fence, and then you can relax until the police come.
It is a visual focus point, and on the west side you can see the Green Mountains. Anyway, okay. I'm getting pushback from the people who know things, and we don't have enough of a quorum to say whether my opinions should carry any weight. So I think we need to park that. Anything else? Matt and Emily?
No, I think this is all good discussion, and where I come back to, and when I give the select board the 5-minute tour of what we've been up to in a little while, the thing I emphasize is that this grid, building a grid of walkable streets and tap corners, and dictating where those streets will go with a fairly high degree of precision. This is one of the most fundamental differences between the way Williston has looked at land use in the growth center before and the way it's looking now.
Yes.
This is really different, and there are a lot of moving parts underneath this that work to create the environment that was discussed as part of the vision plan. So it's important, and there's a lot happening on this map, but the big thing that is happening on this map is preparing for a grid of walkable streets and walkable blocks of buildings that are pleasant to be on as a human being, not just sitting in your car. And there's a lot of ways to get there. This is a good way to get there, and that to me is the big takeaway coming out of the regulating plan. As the town evolves, different designations may make sense on different street frontages than the way this is laid out today. Other green spaces or opportunities for green spaces may pop up, or opportunities to buy a piece of private land for a civic use may pop up that aren't anticipated here. My go-to metaphor, the code is the Lego set. This is buying the Lego set, and you can build what's on the box, but you have the pieces after that to do a whole lot of other things as conditions change or desires change for this area. And this is I'd say this is the Lego set, and what we have now under zoning is more like, those, if you're a parent, those tubs of putty your kids always want, they're by the cash register. Eventually, you shape it into whatever you want, but it's kind of hard to keep the shape, and eventually it just gets stuck in the car seat. That's more what we have now. So I'm a Lego fan. They're much cleaner and more adaptable forward.
Before we leave, can I share?
The putty hurts less when you step on it.
Yeah.
This is true.
If I could share two more small things right where you're zoomed into, Jeff, and I put them in the comments. The new green on the new Trader Lane there, if you're there and you want to walk onto the shopping area on Wright Ave, it looked to me like a little bit of a pinch point going up Trader Lane to get there. And I wondered if would it be possible that there'd be a pedestrian pass through underneath the, on the ground level, underneath of upper stories going through that block, right there. Just basically going from the northeast corner of the green up to, from there to there. And it would be a nice feature if there were a wide pedestrian undercover walkway.
Those pretty much, understatement, tend to be really unpleasant places just because they're, even if it's 12 feet up, it's kind of.
Okay. So it's not going to feel like a garden. Okay.
And I mean, Chip and I, it's theoretically possible for that landowner to decide to do that.
Yeah, good. And the other one is if Wright Avenue doesn't work out as our storefront area, do we want to identify a secondary possibility? And do we think that if Wright Avenue does develop that way, that it might want to extend across onto Connor Way? My previous comments about the northern side of Connor Way accepted.
Well,
in other words, we've just identified one block or 1.5 blocks there.
Well, but remember this red says you must build a storefront, a shop front. And the orange is you may build a shop front. So I'm thinking there's a real logical extension that Connor Way would, with new buildings, somebody would put shop fronts there. But I don't want to make them put it there. Because
no, good point.
Stingy.
I hear you, Chapin, though, in terms of if Wright doesn't work out, and I think
Oh,
let's see what happens first, but certainly I think we have a couple options if Wright doesn't end up working out in terms of if we want to have that purely shop front street.
yeah, I would suggest, because when all these first came up, I ground my teeth and my gums bled, but I put a lot of time into looking at an alternate. And I think that the best way to do it would involve reworking this connection a little bit, so it maybe came through. But let's definitely keep our fingers crossed. Hope that does not happen. I certainly am.
Okay.
Because then
Okay,
you lose that connection across to A.
yep, okay, good. Shayla, are you okay if we move on?
Yeah, Matt, I just wanted to add to your pitch. Did Matt leave? No, you
He's
there?
here.
I'm here, sorry,
No, I
Okay.
just can't tell in the video.
Right.
I do think the other piece that is important is this idea of sort of the building more residential, more community space in this area. That doesn't exist right now at all. The housing apartments in a lot of this space, except for Finney, right? And so I do think that that's a new idea to some people. And this really reinforces that and enforces that in a very different way, a very different vision.
yes, and it's about living in Taft Corners, not necessarily living in some particular development.
Exactly.
The model has been the Finney Crossing, the Cottonwood Crossing, or some
The
of the
Maple Tree
others.
Place, though.
This is a way to pull for a cohesiveness across the whole area that, you would get to Taft Corners and say, I'm home.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Make it a place.
And yeah, Jeff, your comment about that's where the real market is, absolutely.
And
Where's what the,
it's really interesting to see, and it's partly because, but not only because I'm in Washington, DC, but the advertisements that the people who are building, high density townhouses and new apartments and condominiums, they're advertising for, it's all of life within a walking distance, urban living. The way they advertise it, it's just like I couldn't have imagined 15 years ago.
okay. I know the other thing that goes in the civic quadrant that I'm worried about is the multi-level parking garage for people who are using public transportation and attending the civic buildings, including the museum and the library and so forth. Okay.
Have to be an elevator.
What about an elevator?
I mean, if we're talking multi-story, parking garage, there's going to have to be elevators.
Okay.
Yeah, just saying. I mean, if you're worried about accessibility, like that's going to be a thing. They're going to have to put elevators in the parking garage.
Oh, I thought they already had to.
Yeah, you can't get away with a parking garage without an elevator, can you?
I don't think
No.
you can.
By code, you can't.
We don't have any in Vermont though, do we?
You doing,
Oh,
Bert?
yeah, no, all the ones in Burlington all have elevators.
Oh, elevators for the people, not for the cars.
Oh,
Yeah. Sorry, are you talking about cars? I was talking about people.
Okay. So before we leave this, I just want to say what Matt said earlier, which is at the bottom, he has upcoming meetings. December 21 is today, January 4th, form-based code, building functions, parking and loading, administration, etc. Official map and zoning map, and then January 18th, a wrap up, so that on February 1st, we can have our first public hearing. That's very ambitious. but it's the schedule that would allow us to have something in place before growth management in March, possibly. And it would, basically, to me, it's putting a stake in the ground of the new zoning, even though we may have areas that we want to revise it as quickly as possible.
Mhm.
And I think as Matt mentioned too, we can use the opportunity on the 18th to continue to talk about potential changes. The PC theoretically can make those changes at the public hearing on February 1st, or sorry, whenever that date is.
Yep. Sounds good. Okay, and I have put things in the shared project journal some time ago. And we should talk about them sometime, but they may be things we wanted to say are friction points to talk about in the long range.
Mhm.
One of them, for instance, is how do we make this be a place, but not have it be a quote town center that competes with the village center that has current municipal buildings and school? And how does we prevent it from being like Essex Junction and Essex Town in terms of the relationship between people who live in one and people who live in the other?
You're already in one municipality with the same tax rate. That'll help.
Yeah.
Sorry. Not a quorum. I feel like I can joke.
Start getting referendums to break off Taft Corners because it's costing us too much in our tax rate.
Hey, that's how
Okay.
Winooski and Colchester split 100 years ago.
I know, and that's what I want to avoid one way or another. So Matt had, if we could close that out, I think then, okay? So moving on, you're welcome to stay, Taylor and Jeff. if you
Chapin, can I
want.
make one more comment? And this is more for staff and for Jeff, is that folks, we should think through Jeff's scope of work and the fact that he has, essentially task-based contract right now. And what that means for his future work after passage of the bylaw theoretically in March. And what that means in terms of his ability to continue to work with us. So we can talk about that online or offline, excuse me, but I just wanted to point that out. But thank you, Chapin and PC folks, and we'll catch you after the new year.
Merry
Thank you
Christmas.
very much. So I just want to say your FYI items on the agenda are amazing. And I followed some of the links
Oh, good.
and like one of them I went too deep because I went into your memo about this. Was it within that there was a link to the one about how much we're going to grow in the
Yes,
the next 10 years? And
five
Five
years.
5 years. Okay, and then I read that. I realized there's, I already am aware of a ton of work that the planning department is doing. And this, it was really nice that you shared this update with us.
Yeah, we're hoping to make that an ongoing thing that we continue to fill out for folks, just as a super quick. Here are some things that are going on in the office and that I think planning commission members would be interested in. There's a lot of fun stuff to look at on the DRB agendas. And if you stick around long enough on the planning commission, you actually get to see things you touched in the bylaw play out in those development reviews. And a really recent example is the parking numbers that were just adopted by the select board and just finished by the planning commission this fall have already been applied to the review of one project, the senior housing building at Finley Crossing. And you can, if you read that staff report, you'll read, that there's a pretty hard analysis happening of the proposed parking there and really trying to pose the question to the DRB of, is it justifiable for the applicant to build this amount of parking for this land use? And you can see where Emily in the staff report sort of identified the struggle points there of the kinds of things that we deal with and dealing with some of the impacts of that parking on the site and on the Finney Crossing project. And of course, dealing with the fact that we've got the power lines and you can't do much else with them. But you can really see us pushing the current zoning bylaw to its absolute most utility. I'm going to say it really doesn't get much better than this under the current code. And you might look at that building and also imagine what would happen if it was reviewed under the form-based code instead. and where that, just as a thought experiment, if you dive into it. So that's what we really want to do, is highlight some of those things. You know, we did link to the Wright Avenue, Aldi supermarket. That one's obviously been a point of contention for this group because it puts a big old parking lot on Wright Avenue, which Jeff has coded as shop front. And again, you know, you can go in, at this point, there's a hack review, the design review is done. There will be a DRB staff report coming on that pre-application, and we'll highlight that as well, because it's really worth looking at kind of where we can get with what we have, and really makes the case for an updated code that really helps the town zoom in on what it says it wants.
And we're fighting a public relations coup in that they came in with pre-app saying they wouldn't name the store. And then they made an announcement. The announcement makes it sound as though it's a done deal. And so I've had people emailing me from Iowa and California saying, oh, I see you're getting an Aldi's in Williston. And I'm saying that hasn't even passed pre-app yet, you know, and so they're trying to create a demand in the public by that tactic.
Wow. I did have a question, Matt. I did also follow a couple of the links, although probably not necessarily as cheap, but I was looking at the growth management map.
Yep.
Yeah. There's one of the links in the FYI. I'm not tracking my tabs well tonight, so I'm not going to pretend I know which one. But I did think about sort of one of the things that we've talked about a bunch here, which is, you know, speed of development and amount of development, where we want it to be. And I'm embarrassed to say, I don't know where these numbers come from and whether they can be adjusted to really, especially once we have form-based code in place for Taft's Corners, to push more of it into that area. You know, we've heard from the residential zoning, you know, community that they're really frustrated with what's happening there. You know, can we push more towards Taft's Corners or not?
Yeah, so, you know, really briefly, Shayla, there's some numbers that they don't perfectly reflect the distribution in the bylaw, but they're fairly close. There's numbers that are actually in the town plan. So if they were really fundamentally changed, we probably need to look at a town plan amendment. And I would recommend considering one, you know, related to, as you pull the vision plan into the town plan, for the 2025 draft, and maybe even before. There's also some policy things about growth management and the way it could be administered while keeping those numerical limits in place that could shift some focus to Taft Corners. And because we have to talk about growth management in the form-based code somewhere in this project, we are working on a update to that chapter that will bring you next time. That I'm just going to say it deals more with administration and how allocation happens than the actual numbers, but it would probably result in a more even pace of growth in Taft Corners, with probably a more efficient use of the allocation. But there's a bigger question, which is, do you want to change the actual numbers? And both, do you want to change what the town has stated as a matter of policy is an accepted maximum rate of residential growth, which is the 80 units per year number that's kind of been there since 1990. And then within whatever that number is, do you want to shift the priorities around, I think as you suggested, to possibly focus more on the growth center and less on the outlying parts of town? Is that accurate?
Exactly. No, exactly. Okay, so it is it's a town plan amendment, what I'm thinking of. And Chapin, just since you're the only other one here. I mean, what I would think is that we would want to really sort of bump up the Taft's Corners one and maybe bump down the residential but really try to make it clear to everyone that, we're okay with growth. We understand it's happening and this is where we want it to happen. And incentivize that. I would be for that.
Yep. I think that's one of the bigger policy levers the town has, so long as it continues to use growth management as its tool. And, there are some other questions out there related to what is the reasoning behind limiting growth in such a sort of a hard numerical way? And what are some of the other policy things that might happen that could bring focus to Taft Corners and or moderate the pace outside of its boundaries? So the more we talk about it here in the office, the further out we start reaching into other policy things, many of which are more in the hands of the select board, but it all speaks to using the town plan process to take a really big look at growth, development, and growth management in particular.
I don't have any helpful advice, but one of the things I worry about, Shayla, is that if Taft Corners becomes a place and it's attractive and it's doing well with high density housing, it may actually increase demand from somebody who wants to be near it but not in it.
Yep.
At some of these suburban developments in a residential zone. And so I'm worried that the demand may keep going. In terms of our energy plan, homes on half-acre lots are anathema because they're automobile centric and 4 walls per unit. They're not as efficient in many ways. They have a much bigger impact on the environment. So in terms of our energy plan, we really want to have everybody be on public transit, be in a dense area as much as possible. And I do hope what happens with the other, it's strange for people to see clustered development and multi-family development in the residential zone, but I think it's one of the possible in-betweens.
Yeah, no, I hear that. And it's just this question to me of, we are part of this larger region and housing is such a problem. I mean, it's so bad right now. And, here we are and we want this place to look different and to have infill and to be vibrant. And for that to happen, we have to have housing built there. And obviously we can't do it all at once, but I do feel fairly strongly that we need it now, and this is where we want it. And so, I hear you on the demand thing. I guess what I'm saying, Chapin, is can we skip the in-between a little bit?
The video that's at the beginning of one of the 2 surveys, is it the regulating plan one that he included a link to a video where it all began? It was after the fire in London in 16, whatever.
The podcast.
Yeah, that podcast.
Yeah.
But the annoying music in the background all the time. That podcast just makes you look at Savannah, Georgia, or Philadelphia and say, okay, this is what happens when there was a plan before it was all filled in. And what we've been having here was just sort of morphing as developers want to do things. And it makes a really strong point that having a plan makes it cohesive and makes it much more pleasant for the visitor as well as the person who lives there. So I think that is a strong case. I was wondering, we have 8 minutes left, I think, before our 7 minutes. And we didn't review the capital budget, but I reviewed the capital budget in preparation. So could I read comments into the minutes if it were?
Well,
Yeah,
and are we going to do it again? I mean, I'm worried that we didn't, again, we didn't have a quorum and.
Yeah, no, I've since throughout the meeting communicated with Shirley. She's really sorry. She was tied up in the select board and didn't have her calendar reminder open to tell her to go to the other meeting she was double booked for tonight.
She's really got a lot going on.
I have a lot of sympathy for that. I've been there. So she said she put January 4th on to come talk to the commission, but we can certainly put some things in the record and pass notes on right now in the few minutes we have remaining if folks want to.
I would just say the intent of our review is to see if there are things in the capital plan that are in conformance or not in conformance with the town plan. That's the way I read it. And the main one we brought up before was being in conformance with the energy plan amendment to the town plan. And so I was looking at that in particular, and what I could see is that an effort has been made to acknowledge the energy things. There's verbiage around the buildings, like we need to make them tighter and we will make them tighter and stuff like that. And there's verbiage in every vehicle saying when EVs become practical, we will be purchasing them, electric pickup trucks, say, for the and so forth. But it's nothing is in the details about that. And when the police budget was presented, which was before we were given access to this document, they said nothing about electric police vehicles. And we know that our police cars go 60,000 miles a year and they get 9 miles per gallon on average. And that's a huge amount of fossil fuel that wouldn't be spent if they were electric. And they said nothing in the presentation to the select board. And so I put in the chat, when are we considering electric vehicles for police cruisers? And Eric asked that question when they were through their presentation. And then they talked about it. And now that we've seen it, I can see they put something in the top verbiage. The top verbiage said 2 to 5 years, we might be looking at it. But once I prompted them, they said, oh yeah, Richmond has a Tesla that's totally outfitted. Essex has hybrids that are some Ford Escapade or something. And Burlington has hybrids. And we're waiting to see how those look. So to me, and that we might be doing it in 5 years is what they said during the hearing. To me, it shows the lack of an energy coordinator to sort of help them through the process of evaluating faster. So that it's a change, it's new, it's different. Public Works said about the parking lot here that we need to add 20 plus or minus new parking spaces. The first phase, so forth. And during the design work for this project, electric vehicle charging will be explored for the public and police vehicles as part of possible fleet changes in coming years, which is great. But nothing about having a solar canopy, nothing about exploring storage, battery electric storage, which could also serve as a backup instead of having a diesel generator out back that has to be run every Friday morning just to make sure it can run when it needs to. So battery electric storage, if we, by adding more solar, worked with the power company to help them manage grid balance, if we're generating a lot of electricity in the day and then using it at night, if we install storage as well, they may help us with a program. For instance, their Powerwell program for residential, they charge very little if they can use the power to reduce their peaks. I have 2 Powerwells installed for a total of $1,000 each, $2,000. I have 2 Powerwalls because they can use them. It was that cheap. And so the town should be negotiating with Green Mountain Power on generating more and storing more, and what kind of a deal can we get if we do that. And so to me, that's missing out of here, but there is at least acknowledgement of the solar component. There's only one item that's not vehicles that mentions what the energy, to me, that's in that category, and that's Eric put in applying for 2 electric vehicle charging stations, one at Catamount and one at Community Park, I think, 2 community park places for people to charge their car. And he made a note that ARPA funds could be used to fund this. I think it was put in because there was ARPA funds. And what I think is that we don't even necessarily need to use ARPA funds. It may be other grants are available. And we need an energy coordinator to be exploring those grants and so forth. So to me, it just said the current staff is making an effort and they're not achieving success, in my view, of moving fast enough towards the goals of the energy plan.
Can I ask too, I didn't see anything about bike lanes, and I know that's we've got a bunch of bike lanes we want built, and I think that that is a thing that you can use ARPA funds for. I didn't even see it in like the future plans, and I wasn't sure if it's just because it's only about sidewalks and roads, but
Yes. And can I pile on, Shayla, and just say the second sidewalk plow in the capital plan is now in FY 2024. It's been pushed out. Last year they pushed it out, and that makes our goal of making it more walkable, pedestrian-friendly town is important. And they have requests for more plowing of sidewalks every year that they deny because we don't have a second sidewalk plow. It also means we don't have a backup if the one breaks down. And so I just wanted to, on that one, say I can't understand why it's not in the FY 23 capital plan.
And I think this comes back to a little bit of my frustration with the process, Matt, and I know I'm not blaming anybody. It's just, we didn't get a real answer on that last time, and then to not have it here again makes me feel like our review of this budget is either irrelevant or not being taken seriously, which is frustrating.
Yeah, and
Again,
I
I'm
feel that.
I'm not pointing fingers. I appreciate everything you guys are doing. I'm
So-
feeling frustrated by that.
One of the issues is timing, which is there's really not a complete capital budget to review until just before I send it. And departments are not preparing draft capital budgets that anybody outside of, the department head's desk can really interact with until very close to the end. Chapin and I talked about this issue a little bit yesterday, and particularly with energy plan monitoring, I think there's a lot of opportunity for an in-house energy coordinator to be sitting down with those department heads when they set out on their capital plan and saying, okay, here's what the energy plan says. What does your capital budget proposal look like? How does it address this?
And how can I help you? Like,
Here's the grants.
yeah.
Right. Here's the grant I can help you write to do that thing sooner.
And Shayla, that's why I jumped to the energy coordinator, because I see the problem as being that they don't accept that we should have a role until there is a plan to review. And once there's a plan to review, it's too late to have the kind of input that we feel is needed for the shift to the changes in the.
Well, I know, David, I don't disagree at all, but I don't think that the energy coordinator is necessarily in charge of the sidewalk plow or the bike lanes, and like those are not getting addressed either. And so maybe, and again, please do not take Emily and Matt, my frustration as a frustration at either of you at all. Like, how does that happen? How did those pieces get in there in a way that is timely? And I hear you on the public doc. I mean, I work for government, right? Public documents and what can be released and not released. I definitely understand that. But it does feel like kind of we're on repeat here. And especially in a year where there is money, there is funding that could be used for a bunch of these things. And much more so than we normally have because of ARPA. And so that just, I don't know what the best way, and I'm not feeling like I could tell you, oh, I know which bike lane should be built. I don't have that expertise, but it's very strange to me knowing what the plan says and what we're looking for in terms of bike access in the community and what we've heard from people in Williston about wanting that's not even mentioned. Again, in a year when we had money to do that kind of thing.
I mean, one thing to remember too is our two largest bike projects, Mountain View Road and Williston Road, are supposed to be 100% state funded as circumferential highway alternatives projects. And despite the fact that the state is committed to funding 100%, we've budgeted $100,000 of transportation impact fee money to go towards those projects to try to kick them off if we want to spend it. We haven't had a lot of faith that spending our money is going to do anything to generate state money. I spent an hour and a half on the phone today with somebody who has to get out onto Route 2A every day if he wants to leave his neighborhood. And, what did we talk about? How come they didn't build the CERC? If they're not going to build the CERC, how come they're not doing all the things that are going to make traffic better on Route 2A? And, one of the things that's hardest in this job is when I don't have a good answer for somebody. And when I say, well, we have these improvement projects, James Brown Drive is one of them, Crescent Connector and Essex is another. But the CERC was canceled 10 years ago. And only a very few of those things have actually been constructed. It's just hard to be the ambassador for a system that moves that slowly. And that's what you find yourself saying is, well, it's gonna happen eventually. And by the way, it won't be perfect, and sometimes it's still gonna be hard to turn left out of Stirrup Circle. Because 2A is a very busy road. But the town, and I believe the Regional Planning Commission in its efforts in Montpelier have both expressed a lot of frustration that the circumferential highway alternatives projects have been on such a slow track. If we had all of those Williston projects done, we'd have two really nice bike routes that people are just clamoring for, especially Taft Corners to the village. And I wish I knew how to get there sooner.
Although with what they did with Church Hill being up now only 2 lanes and wide bike lanes and the bike lanes, I now ride between here and Taft Corners on my bike and feel quite safe. And so we might even want to reevaluate where some of that went. In other words, the north-south route going up the right of way for the CERC highway that's on our official map. That would be a nice connector for bicyclists because it goes by several developments. It goes by the current rec path that services South Ridge and once to the north of that, and it goes right by Brennan Woods or through Brennan Woods. So that would be very useful even before it connects to something useful on Mountain View.
Yeah. Yeah, and as a reminder, when the official map comes in as part of the form-based code bylaw amendment, it's the official map for the whole town. So that's a piece that will include things outside the growth center, including that bold statement of policy about wanting to repurpose the CERC right-of-way for a linear park and bike route, which may raise some eyebrows in Montpelier. I'm not sure. We haven't really tried that idea out with anybody up there. But I think it's a good one.
And I wanted to give us the right turn lane space on that down by Route 2.
Yeah.
So we can make an expanded Forest Park south of Allenbrook School.
Yes.
I'm working on that with Melinda, having a forest park with cross-country ski trails and pedestrian trails through that area. Okay,
And
we're
then-
9 o'clock. I'm sorry,
Sorry.
Sheila. Go ahead.
Just one tiny other thing, Matt, is I would love, and I know our schedule is packed, and so this would be like for next year kind of thing, but I think one thing that I'm really interested in is the section on our parks and public spaces, and especially kind of coming off of the form-based code, if we could do a tiny bit of a deeper dive into, and maybe this is the way to do it, do a little bit of a deeper dive like next late summer, fall into parks and recreation spaces and sort of the public areas in the town and what is happening that's in accordance with the town plan and what's not, and what support people and staff need in order to get to kind of a more desired state. And that's more in line with the town plan. So I don't know what that looks like exactly, but when I'm looking at the capital budget, I'm just thinking like a concrete way that maybe we could be involved on the front end is not necessarily talking specific budget line items, but meeting with staff to talk about, okay, what is it that you're doing? How does it align with the town plan? Where are the gaps and what do you need? And what recommendations can we make to the select board or to whomever to support you getting closer to alignment?
Yeah. You know, I think a lot of this speaks to, town plan has traditionally been heavily directed towards, recommended changes in land use policy, which is great, but you only get to make an impact if somebody wants to develop something. You know, what I think I've heard over and over again is more and more desire to have the town plan used in the way the town invests its resources, spends its money, prioritizes its staff work plans, all those other things we do. And so that, like your question about parks, like we want to have, well, first off, there's a statement of policy in there that needs to just be checked in with. It basically says, we don't want to own any more public parks because they're expensive to maintain. You know, we want them to be privately maintained by HOAs and new subdivisions. That's not what I'm hearing the planning commission say anymore. And so, you know, flag that, you know, I think there's a lot of things in the town plan, you know, which is the 2017 plan, that are holdovers from 2011 and before 2006, because it's been this sort of iterative process. And, you know, we're going to talk a little bit in the next fiscal year about how to design our town plan process a little differently. And I think one of them is it's probably time to throw the old plan out the window and build a new one from the ground up.
Build back better.
I don't know if that's allowed. I don't know if we have the money for that.
It's not tied to that. It'll never happen, Emily.
Yeah,
It was a good pun. I had to throw it in there.
but I really think like there's some pretty big assumptions that have just carried over since the turn of the century at this point, that are worth a look and that are, you know, big questions like when we did the forum on growth and you point to those land use boundaries and say, should these be the boundaries going forward? You know, are these the limits of the sewer service area through our vision that extends out to maybe 2050? And then, you know, what if, depending on what the answer is to all those big questions, what are all the policy things? And some of them are land use, but some of them are budget, and some of them are, hey, town staff, focus on this, not that. And, you know, I'm going to be really hammering on the select board when they see the town plan to say, you know, this is your statement of policy that you will hopefully be using to guide your decision making when you're deciding, you know, what it is you're telling the town manager to do, what it is you're telling the town departments to do via the goals you set for the manager. So it all needs to kind of come from the top, but the top needs to be adopting that comprehensive plan and really committing to using it. And I want to give them a plan they can use, more so than they maybe have been able to use the current version.
Sorry, Chapin, I'm done. Done being difficult.
No, you're good.
It's a lot of food for thought. I really appreciate that.
I watched Matt present budget on Channel 17, and he was asked sort of this long-term question. And he pointed out that it was more about form-based code, but he pointed out that with it comes public responsibilities. And so we're going to have to invest in the parks and the whatnot there. And so he's already made that point to them this year. And it's very true that we, with the current reluctance to spend town money or anybody's money on anything in our town budget. We have, it won't be as successful, this plan won't be as successful if we don't have public investment in the public infrastructure. Municipal investment in the public infrastructure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's stop there. Thank you so much, Shayla. If you weren't here, we wouldn't have even had a meeting. Thank you for being here.
No, I'm happy to be here.
And thank you,
Thank you for
Emily,
sharing.
and Matt. I hope we've moved the progress along a little bit, even with just two of
Always.
us.
Absolutely. Thank you both.
Okay.
All right.
See you
Meeting
next
adjourned.
year.
See you
Yeah.
next year.
Meeting adjourned at 9:14.
Thanks, everybody.